back to Flip the Tables, the podcast where we continue to challenge leadership norms and remind ourselves that avoiding hard conversations is not a fruit of the Spirit. And reminding leaders that communication doesn't start with just what you say, it starts with how well you listen. Today's episode is all about the importance of communication, especially the hard conversations that are necessary for growth. Nothing says super healthy leadership like smiling in meetings, venting in private, and sending a per my last email as a spiritual weapon. Most modern leaders have truly mastered the art of fake peace. Jesus, however, did not die so that we could master passive-aggressive communication, but to be peacemakers, moving the mission forward. So say the hard thing, because love speaks. Hard conversations are truly uncomfortable. We avoid them because we fear conflict, rejection, awkward silences, or someone crying. Stone, Patton, and Heen tell us that leaders often avoid difficult conversations due to the emotional discomfort they cause, even when doing so harms performance and trust. Meanwhile, Lachoni identifies fear of conflict as a primary dysfunction in teams. It's true. Avoidance feels kind, but in reality, it's not. Ephesians 4:15 reads, "Speaking the truth in love, let us grow." Growth requires truth. Truth requires courage, and courage requires love. We know the master of hard conversations, Jesus. Jesus was never conflict avoidant. He corrected Peter in Matthew 16:23. He confronted religious hypocrisy in Matthew 23. He challenged the rich young leader in Mark 10:21. He restored Peter with direct questions in John 21. And yet, Scripture says in John 13:1, having loved his own, he loved them to the end. His hard conversations were rooted in love, not ego. Even his rebuke was redemptive. Calling someone a brood of vipers sounds harsh until you realize he was confronting systems that crushed people, the exact opposite of love. Context is very, very important. Modern leadership confirms what Scripture has modeled. Scott proved that clear, candid feedback improved performance and built trust. Edmondson proved that psychological safety allows people to receive correction without shame. Brown, she proved that compassionate accountability strengthened relationships. In other words, people don't fear truth. They fear humiliation. Jesus never once humiliated the humble. He confronted the proud. Love leadership, and I may be a little biased here, is the best framework to have those hard conversations. Because here's the key. Love leadership doesn't avoid the hard conversations, it redeems them. Proverbs 27:6 reads, "Wounds from a friend are trustworthy." Yes, Scripture just endorsed tough love. We're going to break down how love leadership guides us to have these hard conversations. Love checks motives first. Before speaking, we need to ask whether I'm trying to help or win. Am I seeking restoration or revenge? Philippians 2:3 reads, "Do nothing out of selfish ambition." That is a sentence that seems to just be on repeat this season, among many others. Listen, if your goal is to prove you are right, congratulations. You're not leading, but you are debating. Love speaks clearly, not with cruelty. Jesus was direct, not destructive. Matthew 5:37 reads, "Let your yes be yes, and your no be no." Clarity is kindness. Vagueness is avoidance wearing a cardigan. Love protects dignity. Public correction for private issues is not leadership, it's theater. Matthew 18:15 reads, "If your brother sins against you, go and tell him in private." Jesus invented the private meeting. We invented the reply all or complete avoidance, whichever way you lean. And finally, love balances truth and grace. Not grace or truth. Not truth without grace, but both are required. John 1:14 reads, "The Word became flesh, full of grace and truth. Truth without grace wounds, and grace without truth withers." Avoiding hard conversations may feel nice in the moment, but avoidance allows harmful behavior to continue. It breeds resentment and erodes trust. Lachoni proved that under-addressed conflict reduces team effectiveness and increases turnover. Scripture calls leaders to courage. Proverbs 27:5 reads, "Better an open reprimand than a concealed love." Concealed love isn't love, it's comfort. and comfort never transforms anyone. If you want to communicate like Jesus, you must pray before you speak, not as a delay tactic, but as a heart alignment. Lead with care, not accusation. Name the behavior, not the person. You must separate identity from action. Offer a path forward because Jesus corrected and then invited. We've leaned heavily into the importance of hard conversations as part of your leadership communication. This does not give a pass into another piece of communication that seems to get lost, which is listening. One of the most overestimated skills in leadership is talking. Somewhere along the way, we crown the loudest voice in the room as the strongest leader, the most articulate, the most persuasive. Meanwhile, research keeps proving the opposite. For years, scholars have been clear that active listening isn't passive. It is a complex, intentional process that requires cognitive focus, emotional intelligence, and behavioral response, according to Tenet. Most leaders don't struggle with communication as a whole. They struggle with listening. Durning demonstrates that leaders who prioritize listening make better decisions because they draw on broader, more accurate information. Which sounds really obvious, but apparently is still quite difficult to practice. If leaders were really listening, we would not continue to see the same blind spots repeated. The kicker is that listening is one of the strongest predictors of psychological safety, according to Edmondson. One thing that is worse than not listening is pretending to listen. Pseudo-listening. You know, the nodding, the semi-eye contact while you're mentally crafting a response or completely just checked out. People can feel if they're being heard. When this happens, your people will start holding back insight, feedback, and concerns. Love leadership doesn't just communicate clearly. It listens deeply. And this isn't just a principle. It's biblical. James 1:19 reads, "Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry." Notice the order. Our problem is that most leaders have completely flipped that order and then wonder why communication breaks down. Listening isn't about hearing words. It's about valuing people. Listening builds trust, increases engagement, creates safety, and improves outcomes. Love leadership chooses to build. It leans in and asks better questions and resists the urge to interrupt, fix, or dominate the conversation. And honestly, this is something I still work on every single day. I'm excited to welcome Mr. Andrew Colburn, head wrestling coach for Shorter University. He was one of my last-minute guests. I literally put on Facebook for any takers on 3 episodes, and he was willing. After having some conversations on what each episode was about, this is where we landed. And having worked with Andrew for roughly over a year, he is a fantastic communicator among coworkers. I'm excited to hear how he handles communication in his leadership position. Welcome back to Flip the Tables. We are here with Coach Andrew Colburn, head coach of Shorter University's wrestling program. And I'm going to start by letting him just introduce himself a little bit.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Bethany. And like you said, I'm Andrew Colburn, and I'm the head wrestling coach at Shorter. I'm super happy to be here and excited to probably learn something too.
This isn't on our question list, but would you share with kind of how you start maybe your season, just initiating how you communicate with your players?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess kind of our first initial form of communication is through GroupMe. And that's where we kind of relay all of our team meetings and practices, all that kind of stuff. And then initially, once we get everybody to campus, usually by that kind of 4th day of class per the NCAA, that's when we're allowed to start having meetings and stuff. That's when we have our first team meeting. And so then it's just in-person communication, trying to listen to them as well as communicate with them verbally. But yeah, a lot of it's through in-person stuff. Or in writing through GroupMe, things like that. But yeah, try to be in person as much as possible, though. I like to talk face to face more than through the phone or text or anything like that.
I liked how you put emphasis on listening, because that seems to be a piece of communication that gets lost in leadership.
Yes.
I think a lot of people think leadership is, well, I can just talk and everyone else listens, and that's just not the case.
And I think that's where even I at one point got kind of, or even get kind of like blinded by like communication. Like you think communication, and I mean, even on like a job interview, like a job application, you see like written and verbal communication skills. You know, you never tie in like the actual like listening part
Yeah.
of communication and how important that can be. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So I'm going to skip around on our questions. So number 4 is, if being quick to listen and slow to speak, like it says in James 1:19, become the norm in leadership, what do you think would change in the way just overall teams would function and perform?
I think listening is such a powerful tool, or could be such a powerful tool. I'm guilty of it. I don't always listen, I guess, with the best intent. Definitely not like James does, or did. But I think there's kind of like the way I see it, there's kind of like 4 different, I guess you could say, tiers as to like what would change, or what could potentially change. I think people would feel more likely to speak up often, and earlier too. I think that's a big, if you're that type of leader that all you do is communicate but you don't ever listen, or I guess verbally communicate, you don't ever listen, then I think your underlings or your peers or whoever aren't going to be likely to speak up early and often. And I think that can create kind of a barrier for your organization to grow, or for, my instance, for a wrestling team to grow. Not that I want my team to, think that I'm the only one that can make decisions, but, I think I'm doing our end of the year interviews right now with my team. I'm just kind of getting a vibe of where they thought the season went, how they did throughout the year, all that stuff. And a big part of that is listening, and I'm taking that advice, taking those things that feedback that they give, and maybe applying it to things for next year for us. I say maybe because sometimes a lot of their advice isn't necessarily feasible, but I try to relay that message in a kind of positive or a reassuring type of way, so it doesn't make them feel like they can't speak up later on. I think too, your decision making, I think, would be sharper, in the sense that if you're listening and you're listening with that kind of type of intentionality of like, I really want to hear what you're saying and process and then give my feedback. I think that can really elevate that type of communication. I think you also will have more ownership of your actions and of your accountability and all that type of stuff. And then I also think dealing with conflict too, listening to people, and their frustrations or their concerns or their, I think oftentimes we look at just those frustrations and concerns, and we don't listen to people when they sing us praise as well. So I think that's a big part of it too, is listening to how those kind of conflicts play out and things like that.
No, you really hit the nail on the head. I do something similar that you're doing with your players with my whole staff. We'll do group meetings, and we've gotten to a point where I think we're all comfortable to speak our mind in the group, but I still like to do one-on-ones with them 2 times a year, just to get kind of how they're feeling, if they've got new aspirations, new goals, and see how I can help them reach their goals. So I think that goes back to just listening and explaining that I might can't do that right now, but I know what your goal is, so I can be on the lookout for those opportunities and help, even if it's not natural, which would make me sad, but not everybody's going to stay here forever.
No, and that's the same type of challenge now. I think that a lot of us NCAA coaches, and we think all coaches probably, but with the transfer portal and all that stuff and all the changes that are happening there, a kid maybe has some success here at Shorter, and we're a smaller Division II school, and they start to have that success, and then they get picked up from a smaller Division I school or something like that. So is it a part of my plan for them? No, certainly not.
Right.
But I think at the end of the day, if you can just help elevate your people, and I think that comes through verbally communicating well, but also
listening to what they want,
them.
their heart.
Exactly.
And putting self aside. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. So let's move to next question about hard conversations. So how hard conversations are unavoidable in leadership. How do you approach truth telling in a way that is both direct and deeply human without slipping into avoidance and harshness?
Yeah, this is this is one, when I read it, I kind of had to take a step back and realize that it is tough. I mean, it's hard. Conversations are very difficult to have, but they're also necessary to have, especially in positions of leadership. And I think that showing people that you're genuine, and that you really care for them, both, as a person, as a human, and then also within your organization, I think goes a long way, to hopefully they don't see that it's, you being harsh, but it's rather you kind of leading with that type of compassion and care, that you just want them to be successful. But I do think that there's a big difference, or there can be a big difference in your delivery. I think delivery is important. I think I don't want to say I have hard conversations daily, but I've definitely had conversations, I'd say in the last 2 days, that I certainly did not want to have, just because, especially working with, 18, 19, 20-year olds, sometimes they may think that they have it all figured out, and they don't. So, I think the delivery part of that, I think understanding your people, understanding who they are as people. And then, like I said, the delivery part is important, but while still being truthful and being bold with them, I think is also necessary, because if you aren't, you kind of, if you water down the kind of severity of your situation, then maybe it doesn't get, the point doesn't get across as well.
Yeah.
And I think it's the same thing, the opposite of, if you're too severe with your conversation, or you're too difficult with your conversation, and you're not kind of showing enough kind of compassion and things like that, the point can kind of be lost in that too. So
Yeah.
I think it's a balance. I try to do it in a way that, I'm setting aside time to have a conversation, and it's not just like in passing.
Yeah.
I found that, at least in my experience, when you sit someone down and you have a conversation with them, rather than just like as we're walking by, like in the hallway or whatever, like, hey, you weren't at practice today, or whatever
Right.
the situation is, it tends to be a lot more meaningful.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I think it's just really knowing your people, and then also just sticking to the truth,
Yeah.
and making sure that you don't try to deviate a lot off of that path.
Yeah. Like you said, it goes back to building that initial relationship with them and building that trust.
Yeah.
They're going to be more apt to swallow that hard truth from you, because you've already established that.
Absolutely.
I've had to have a few where I just kind of sit them down, and sometimes they can probably tell when it's going to be kind of a hard one, because unfortunately my face has subtitles. But we have all built relationships with each other to where they know it's coming from a place of love, and that we're here for the same mission, and we've got to be on the same boat, or we're just not, it's just not going to work. And then working through that with conversations. And it may not be that only one. We may have to have more, just depending.
I think you really said it well, that like, one thing I guess I forgot to mention is reminding them that we do have the same goals. Sure, they might be worded differently, or we might process our goals differently, but at the end of the day, for my athletes, I want them to ultimately graduate with their degree, win all the matches and all the championships that they can in that meantime, and then ultimately, grow in their life, and that's growing their life through Jesus, as well as growing their personal lives, their professional lives, and all that. That's kind of my 3 main selling points, recruiting someone. So that's all stuff that I try to remind them of, that like, we have the same goals. You don't want to be here for 8 years trying to get, a 4-year degree.
Right.
So you want to work through that process. But like you said, reminding them that they have the same goals that you do, I think is important, because it kind of pulls them back in a little bit. Like, okay, maybe I'm straying away from those goals a little more than I wanted to. So
yeah, a lot of telling them what they need to hear, not necessarily what they want to hear.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so next question. How do you train yourself to respond rather than react in high pressure moments, especially when emotions are elevated on both sides?
Yeah, this is another tough one. I try to, like, I guess, first, as far as training myself, I try to put myself in the situation of being like in a car, and you never know what the next person, or the person beside you or behind you, or that just cut you off, or is, laying on their horn as you're sitting at a green light, what they're going through, or where they're, going to. And so I guess I try to put myself in that situation, in those kind of heated moments, in those high pressure moments of, what are you going through? Sometimes it's hard to bring that up because you don't want to seem insensitive or just assume that someone's going through something. But at the same time, you want to, you want to approach the conversation lightly, and you want to try to remove, like, at least I try to remove as much emotion out of it as possible.
Yeah.
Because I think especially when you're both kind of in that heated emotional argument, you can feel like I'm being attacked, or, you're just saying hurtful things to say hurtful things, when, in reality, that's probably not the case.
Yeah.
So I always try to just, like, I don't know. I think that's the best example I could think of is the car situation. Someone could be,
It's a really good one.
Late for work and they have to get there early, or, maybe a even worse case scenario. They're rushing to the hospital to, say goodbye to a loved one for the last time.
Right.
So there's a lot of situations that I think that I try to put myself in. So I know that, yes, this person might be upset or they might be frustrated or whatever the case may be. But if we can work through it from a more level-headed area, I think that's going to help both of us kind of solve this, or solve the issue and come up with a solution in the first place.
And that's easier with people we see every day.
Yes.
We're going to know them, but like you said, just somebody off the street or a new employee or someone, this is a new rift you have with them. You're like, okay, hold on a minute.
And I think also, like, not necessarily reframing in your head, but like trying to, like, not take words like personally.
Yes.
I think that kind of, in an email, for example, I think email is it's an effective way to communicate, but it's also can be a really poor way to communicate.
The queen of passive.
Yeah. And like, that's, like you may not mean it in a bad way or even in a passive aggressive way, but if I read it or if I perceive it that way, then I'm probably going to, assume that that's the way you said it. And so I think, reframing it in your mind is important too, of like maybe taking a step back or a pause. I tell my team all the time, take a beat is what I say. Take a beat, take a deep breath, and then go. And so I think that's one thing I try to do too, is just take a minute and say, okay, did they really mean this, like, in a harsh way? Maybe, but that doesn't mean that I should react in a harsh way back too. So, but it takes practice. It takes time. It's not something you do overnight.
Right. And I had been told that, I don't know how many times, but it took a book that was recommended to me by a lady I go to church with, and it was called Becoming Unoffendable. And I'm not big on reading big books, so it was the perfect size. And it wasn't super loaded with academic stuff, but it was just real experience of how becoming unoffendable just makes almost every situation a lot easier.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just going in like, okay, like you said, maybe they're just going through something. They didn't mean that towards me. Let's just get to the root of it. And that's what I've told this whole team when I got down here, because there's multi-generational team. It was a little dark, and first thing was, I was like, 9 times out of 10, we're probably just going to have a conversation and get to the root of the problem.
Yep.
And it's not even going to be that bad.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what's happened. So yeah, Becoming Unoffendable, that was a great book. I can't remember who wrote it. I'll have to send it to you.
Yeah, please do.
But yeah, that was a good one.
Cool.
Yeah. Okay, so I just have one more question, and then if you have any. At the end of the day, do people experience your communication as something that builds them up or shuts them down? And what does that reveal about the kind of leader you really are?
Well, I think, you hope that the obvious answer is that you build them up, and I think this was definitely another question that I kind of struggled with, because, like, I don't know, I'm not good at, like, lifting myself up, I guess you could say. But, I think it's something that you hope through, again, building those relationships and having honest conversations, and even those difficult ones, that, again, if you do it from a place of, being genuine and relaying to them that you really just want to see, you just want to bring the best out of them, you hope that it's one of those things that, people would say that it builds them up. I think, again, how important not just verbal communication is, but listening too, in this sense as well. Like, if you can communicate with people, but also listen to what they're communicating to you, I think that's a great way to build people up and ensure that they're they feel valued, within your
Yes.
team and within your organization. I think that's super important. But I also think that, when I say build people up, it doesn't always necessarily mean that you're this happy-go-lucky, cheery person all the time.
Right.
I'm not saying you have to be miserable and down and all that stuff,
Yeah.
but you still have to know when to have those honest conversations and those
Yeah.
difficult conversations that some people may perceive as you tearing them down. But hopefully at the end of the day, they realize that it wasn't really you tearing them down. It was more so of you just trying to get the best out of them and, again, do what's best for your organization. I think it's a balance. I hope people would say that, my communication style and all of that builds them up. I think for some, I'm sure they would say that I don't. But I think that's probably those who maybe don't like those honest conversations as much. But I've talked with some of my wrestlers who say that I need to be even more harsh on them or more strict with them on things like that. But I'm the same way as you. Like, I like to have conversations with my team. I don't like to sit there and scream and yell at them for an hour. I'd rather have a conversation and figure out what we can do to improve the behavior. That way it doesn't happen over and over again.
Yeah.
Rather than me just sit there and scream for being late to a lift or being late to practice or
Yeah.
whatever the case is. Like, when I was in college, that never worked for me. Like, being yelled at didn't really like raise my confidence or anything like that. It just kind of, I don't want to say it made me shut down, but it definitely didn't help me.
Yes.
And so I think I see myself and maybe a lot of my wrestlers. And I think that hopefully having an honest conversation with them helps them realize that it's not me being difficult because, I don't care or anything like that. It's me being difficult because I want to see, because I know that you can do better.
Yeah.
And I know that there's more to give.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Another piece of that is, so I've caught myself, and I think it's important for leaders. This goes back to another area of leadership of holding yourself accountable when you may come off too stern when it wasn't necessary. And I've caught myself a couple of times, kind of stressful, got a lot of events going on, and I'll just pop in an office and I'm like, da 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 da. And then I'll come back in here and sit down and I'm like, you know what? That was really, I need to go fix that. So I will immediately go back and I'm like, I'm so sorry if that came off wrong.
Yeah.
We just got to get this, this, and this. And there's been a couple of times they would be like, okay, good. Cause we weren't sure. And then other times they're like, oh no, we know it's fine. So like, it's that balance again of getting to know each other. But I'll probably do it more often than I should because they've kind of gotten to know who I am, but I'm always like, oh no. Yeah. Was that too mean? Do I need to go back? Like running all those through my head, which I don't think makes a leader weak. Yeah. I just think that, again, it goes back to building that trust up and making them realize that you do care about them. So you think you snap, so you're going to go apologize.
Well, I think a difficult part with leadership too is ownership.
Yes.
And when it's easy to be a great leader when things are going great, and when you're winning or when enrollment's up and all this stuff. But when things aren't going well, that's when the best leaders really come out. And I think I read a book, I don't know, I'm sure you've probably heard of her. Her name's Brene Brown.
Oh yes, love her.
Dare to Lead, one of my favorite books by her. She has the quote, I actually wrote it down because I thought it was perfect. She said, at the end of the day, at the end of the week, I want to say I contributed more than I criticized. And I think that's a big leadership statement right there. Yeah. It's easy to sit in the back and say, you didn't do this, you didn't do that. But I think when you are more so in the front and you're saying, how about if we do this? Or how about if we do that?
Yeah.
I think you're contributing more so than you are just criticizing.
Yeah.
And I think that's a huge part to leadership as well.
Yeah. And this is kind of going off the beaten path, not necessarily communication wise, but you're talking about contributing. And so I've always visualized my leadership as a service, not servant leadership. Love leadership all the way. But when I've described it to people, is like, I want you to be the director and I want you to call me when you need me to help you. Like, I will set up a chair. I will wipe down the table. I will pick up the trash so you can do your job because this is you. And that's, to me, that's what I think leadership is, which is very different than a lot of leaders think, because I have no gumption of wanting to be in the front. Yeah. I want my people to shine. And so to me, that's what I think the most important thing of leadership is pushing them forward and contributing that way. And I'm perfectly fine being behind them.
Oh yeah. No, I definitely think I'm more of like a behind the scenes type of guy too. Like I I don't want the recognition. I don't want the pat on the back like you're doing a great job. I'd rather the great job be shown through success and not just winning and losing and that type of success. But yeah, like the good experience here, the kids graduating and moving on and getting their, getting to work into their careers and all that kind of stuff. And eventually seeing, my guys move on and get married and have children. I was so lucky over the fall. I got to attend one of my former wrestlers' weddings. Like that was such a cool moment that one, I was even invited. And two, that I made that, much of an impact in his life to, for him to feel that he was, or that he should invite me. And so I think that's where, like, I'm definitely not the way I'm looking at it right now, like I'm not a lead from the front type of guy, but I'm more like a communicate from the back type of guy. Like I want to show you where you should go.
But not like a backseat driver.
Exactly. Yes. True. Yeah. That's a good point. But yeah, you don't want to, I don't know. It's a tough.
It's about, you're always learning.
Absolutely.
That's the thing. It's like, I don't think anyone is ever going to master leadership.
Yeah. When I think if you say you have, you're probably not a great leader.
Correct. I agree with that.
And that's, I mean, like I tell my guys in our end of year meetings, like I'm looking to learn too. Like I want your feedback. I want your input on how you think things went. I mean, they're in the thick of it, they're practicing every day. They're lifting every day. They're doing everything that I'm asking of them, which is great. But like, I'm not participating the way they are. So like, I want their feedback. And do I have a lot more experience in college wrestling than they do? Yes. But that still doesn't change the fact that I can still learn something to maybe add to our training or add to our academic schedule, whatever it is, or to maybe take away. So, I think it's all about always learning. Learning about communication, leadership, you name it. I think it's important. So
I agree.
Yeah.
Well, this has been great. Do you have anything else you want to add?
No, I mean, I think that this has been great. I've definitely learned some stuff from thinking through these questions and writing my answers down. And I definitely think it makes me take a step back and look at my communication and my leadership and everything and what I can do differently to maybe help us, to help my team become better. And I think that's what is super exciting. And I think it's reassuring to me that, you have a lot of these same thoughts too. And it's cool that, we're not in the same role, but we have a lot of similar conflicts and similar frustrations and all that kind of stuff. So I guess it's reassuring to see that too.
I'm glad.
But yeah, no, this has been awesome. I really appreciate you having me on.
Well, thank you.
Oh yeah.
I hope you've enjoyed this interview and hearing the different viewpoints of communication. It's so interesting to hear how different leaders in different positions handle their communication styles. And it's always so funny to see how some are more alike than they think. Here's the truth. Silence is not love. Avoidance is not kindness. And passive aggression is not a communication style. Jesus spoke hard truths because he loved deeply. Revelation 3:19 reads, "As many as I love, I rebuke and discipline." Love tells the truth, protects dignity, and chooses restoration over comfort. The next time you're tempted to avoid the hard conversation, remember that Jesus flipped tables. He asked hard questions, and he told uncomfortable truths. And somehow people still ran toward him, because love will always be louder than fear. Next week, we'll be diving into a subject we love to talk about: women in leadership. We will discuss why women in leadership is important and how women were used throughout Scripture, all while squashing some stereotypical thoughts on the subject. So join me back here at the same time, same platforms. This is Flip the Tables. I'm Bethany Brady, and we are leading differently.